Well, I know a lot of people have definitely suggested that there may be a force dyad between Chimere and OSHA. I think there's some evidence of that for sure. We definitely we talked about this a little bit last week. When the helmet breaks away from Chimere, um, you know, a lot of people I think assumed that him killing Jackie is what made OSHA stop and turn, but I think I think it's more that she's sensing Chimere at that point. And you know, uh, Devonda made this point last week too, where that's also when she comes into the shop, he clocks her immediately. And they make a big deal about how Soul and a lot of other people don't sense the difference between May and OSHA. A lot of people can't tell. Um, the guy at the beginning. There's a witness that comes out and can't tell the difference. Because they're twins. But then also, so like the whole episodes 3 and 7, show that Soul can't really tell the difference, and he's really powerful in the Force. They show him to be able to read minds and sense people and things like that. So even though he's really powerful in the Force, he can't tell the difference. And so they set it up to where like a lot of people can't tell the difference, but Chimere clocks it immediately. And so there's something like either Chimere is really you know sensitive to read and Force signatures, which I think there's also some evidence of that, or there's a connection there between them and the Force, kind of calling out to each other, sort of like a Force dyad.
Is this working? Okay. I think they could be a force dyad, but I think when he said he wanted the power of two, I think that's more of a callback to the coven. Because if you remember, their whole thing was like power of one, power of two, power of many. So whether he had direct contact with them or he learned that from May, like I think it was more of a reference to that versus a dyad. I think that there's a possibility that Plagueis did, and if there's a connection between them two, then I mean we know there's a connection, but we don't know what that is, of course. But like he either got it from Plagueis or from May, is my thought. Because we don't know like how long him and May were together, like how they met, all that stuff. So I assume they were together for a couple years. So of course you're gonna talk or you're gonna learn stuff, or she's gonna say something, even though she swore not to, but she made that promise when she was a kid. So, I mean, whatever. But yeah, because if you think about it, like using the power of two to entice OSHA, like that doesn't mean anything to her. But the power of two from the coven means something to her, or should.
Yeah, I like that theory. Um, and I've definitely seen some people say that Plagueis may have had some sort of connection to the coven. He definitely he's studying different branches of the Force and powerful Force users, so he could definitely have been like watching them prior to this or something like that. One thing, oh, one thing I'm surprised more people haven't talked about, is the potential for, obviously there's a connection between OSHA and May. They're one born as two. So and they show that there's the potential for a dyad in that first episode when she has the vision after the crash. So I'm surprised more people aren't talking about them as a potential dyad, uh, or something even stronger than a dyad, because there's a lot more evidence there. Like the force dyad between Chimera and Osha. We're kind of picking up on little subtle things and assuming because of the romance between them, but like there's actual clear evidence in both the dialogue and that scene that there's a dyad sort of connection between Osha and May, and that's I'm super curious to see, you know, to find out the I guess the purpose of the ascension and all that, and how it got messed up and things like that. That's something I don't really have any theories about that, and I'm really curious to see that.
My thing with Osha and May being a possible dyad, the only reason why I question it, because it makes sense, like they're both either either way, they're always going to be on the opposite side because they're just different. But so that makes sense. Obviously, they're connected. That makes sense. But the only thing that kind of gives me hesitation about that is the fact that they're not technically like naturally occurring. Like they're almost an artificial dyad. So it's like, and I don't know if that's a qualification, by the way. I'm not like an expert, but I always I always assumed that the witches split them on purpose. Like I don't think that was like a failure of something. I think they were purposely put into two.
For me, that raises the question of Chimera's creation, because if OSHA's artificially occurring, and they have this connection, to me that I mean, I might be giving away something about the thing I'm writing, but uh, to me that says that there's something up with Chimere's creation that may not be natural in and of itself, as well. Mhm. It is entirely possible, yes. That I don't think that Leslie would go as far as to have Plagueis have succeeded, because that was the whole thing. Plagueis never succeeded in creating life. So I don't think it's going to be that he was outright created, but there definitely could be some element of Plagueis having a hand in his creation somehow, and it not being entirely natural. Um, Yeah. No, that's entirely possible, and definitely, like the way that Leslie kind of lays threads and connects them together and references lore and things, that's entirely possible. You know, and this could be a situation where, Chimere's creation isn't related at all to, it's still somehow unnatural, but it's not related at all to Osha's creation or to Plagueis, but Plagueis somehow influenced both creations, to influence this diet. That's definitely possible. Or Tenebrous, there could be a Tenebrous element there. We were talking about Plagueis's master last week. You know, there's a lot of different ways it could go, but Leslie essentially did confirm that Plagueis was Chimere's master at some point. So, we essentially know that just based on her confirming that, out of universe. But he could have had a hand somehow in some sort of unnatural. He's definitely, like we've been talking about, he experiments with the force. He does weird stuff. He extended his own life. He's trying to extend, you know his life, and ultimately create something from the force. So, it's definitely possible that he could have somehow been interested in two creations, and somehow had a hand in them as well.
I had a question asked actually about the what JC just was saying and what you all were talking about with regards to um like the force acting to create life and plague is failing. I mean, that makes me wonder. It seems like that could be a good explanation for why Chimera is at least presumed to be as old as he is. And like why we don't really have an explanation for why he's been around but nobody knows. I mean, I know there are a lot of theories around that, but that makes me wonder. And also wondering like if the force creates life, especially given the dyad, is there some element of like immortality or vitality, so to speak, that comes
Yeah,
with that? Like,
he Plagueis is seeking immortality, essentially.
right.
And that's the Sith. One of the Sith goals is to become eternal,
Hmm.
and and find immortal life. That's what Palpatine ultimately is seeking to. You
Okay.
know.
So then it's not a stretch to say that like if the force created somebody, they could live at least longer. I mean, I know we already have seen instances of that, but like if the force created somebody, they could live a long time, long, long time.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, like I was saying, Plagueis's experiments were to extend people's life. He actually brought people back from the dead, and like the whole night. Like he did some crazy stuff.
Gotcha.
So there could definitely that could be an element to Chimere's story as well. Where like, and I've seen, I'm this is just to throw this out there for y'all. This is not not necessarily something I'm co-signing, but I have seen a theory on the internet where this is Vernestra's estranged Padawan that we see in the High Republic novels, Imri. Um, he has a very different appearance in the High Republic novels, so you know, a lot of people have already dismissed that. Yeah, he's a white blonde kid in the novels, and obviously Chimer's not. But so I think a lot of people dismiss that already, and I, like I said, I don't necessarily. I'm not necessarily co-signing this theory, but Plagueis's experiments, we've seen that the dark side can change people's appearances and do crazy things. So to me, it's not outside the realm of possibility that this is Emery and that somehow these experiments have extended his life and uh, you know uh, changed his appearance, altered his appearance somehow. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I don't necessarily buy it myself, but it's there's enough there that I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility for sure.
Hey, so I have a question about because I haven't read the High Republic novels, so I don't know too much about Emery, but I've heard about the theories. But how, I guess, like when Vernestra when he was Emery was her Padawan, um, like how long ago was that in relation to the Acolyte? Um,
A long time.
okay.
He would have been dead for sure. And that's another reason I think a lot of people dismiss it. It's like the High Republic timeline is about 100 years before the events of the Acolyte.
So how old is Vernestra then?
Bunestra's old, super old.
Okay.
She in the High Republic novels, she's a teenager, and that's the whole thing. She's like a teen prodigy. So uh, that's like her whole deal. But yeah, so in this, she's 100 and over 100 years old for sure. But she's a Mirialan, so I mean they have longer lives than humans. But yeah, Emery would be dead by natural life. He would be dead. Uh, but that's the thing. Like we don't know that we don't know that something unnatural had happened, and we do see evidence here in the show that there could be something unnatural happening. And I did just want to highlight Sith Babe is listening on the YouTube, and she had a comment here uh, about Plagueis. After he murked you, he brought you back to life, and yeah, that was his whole deal. Like he would best you. He did it to Tenebris, and he did it to Tenebris's second apprentice, Venomous, and then he kept them alive and experimented on them, and would like bring them back to life like over and over again. And yeah, and then their like organs would fail, and yeah, it was a whole thing. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that could be dark.
Yeah, the Sith are dark. The Sith are dark, man. And I don't think Leslie's scared either. That's I really hope we get to see where she was going to go with this for sure.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, like my theory was that the Ascension wasn't going to make Osha and May stronger, but it was going to make the Coven stronger because it was essentially going to take all the power that they had and like pull it with the Coven. And so the reason why I think that is because, well, a couple of reasons why I think that. One, when Osha is about to leave for the Jedi or whatever, the Coven seems like devastated, but not in a way where it's like, oh, we're going to miss Osha. It's more so like they're about to lose something. And so my thought was like, okay, well, maybe they think they're about to lose their future leaders, but May is still there. So they still have at least one future leader that's already gone through the Ascension. She's just like her mom. Like, they're going to be fine. So I'm like, okay, they're losing something tangible. Like, you know what I mean? It's not just, we're sad. Then it's the fact that May and Osha are like exactly the same, like biologically, right? Same M count, same everything. But they show up differently in the Force. And the only thing that's different is the fact that May went through the Ascension and Osha didn't. And I think Osha is objectively stronger than May.
Yeah, and I never thought about the fact that that does happen before everything, before anybody reads anything about either of them. You know, before Soul, before Chimera. So that could be why there is the difference in force signature too, for sure.
I think that is so interesting and a really insightful thread that you wrote, Freckles, because I mean, yeah, when you watch episode 3, and it's 3, right? Yeah, 3 and 7. There are these moments where, like you said, the Coven, Mother Anastasia, they both are really emphasizing, at least to Osha, how powerful she is. You know, you're a very powerful girl. That's what that quote, you know, it's not about good or bad, but power and who gets to wield it. To me, that's really about Osha. That's about May as well, but the emphasis is on Osha because she's the one who wants to leave. She's the one who wants something different. And you're right, the Coven is like she's, you know, they're our future. So if she leaves, you know, what is being tipped off balance here? And, you know, I think people who follow me who know that I'm into Naruto and Boruto, to me that makes sense that like the Ascension could be viewed as a limiter. There's a character in Boruto that has a similar situation that he's so powerful that the people who created him had to put a limiter on him so that he couldn't overthrow the head of their group. So I could totally see that being a thing where like the Ascension could have acted as a limiter even if it was just temporary so that they could have that power of many, that as a group they could be collectively strong, like where we see them working together to possess Kelnaka, and clearly that's a big feat for them. I, I don't know. I think like this show plays with power levels really interestingly because to me, even for May, I would say that she almost appears stronger, maybe close to Indara, who's a very seasoned master. Just the way that, you know, her force push is always very powerful when we see her interact with Indara, with Osha, and I think with Soul. So that's just that makes me think a lot. Um, and then given like Osha is able to do these things with great ease once she's reconnected with the Force after being disconnected for so long. So that's really interesting to me.
I
It's
actually don't think they love them as children. Like, I don't think like the greater coven actually loves them as children. I don't. So what the dynamic reminds me of is, you know, those families that will have a child and the child is like terminally ill or something, and then they'll have another child that's basically born to be an organ donor for that child. That's how I feel like a lot of the coven feels about them, except for Mother Anastasia and Coral, just because they were like, they see themselves as their mothers, but I don't think the coven sees them as like that.
I agree. I agree. There's no evidence of any affection between the rest of the coven and the girls. I wanted to highlight Sith Babe again. She said, "My wild headcanon, the Ascension is how they become one person, so they would merge in the cave and come out one entity." And this is definitely something I've seen flying around, and I go back and forth on it, but I do tend to agree. Um, and the reason the 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 thing that pushes me over the edge to agreeing uh, is that it would create an interesting writing dynamic. And looking at the way that the writing team did things, I think they would have gone this direction. And it creates this dynamic where if it's supposed to if the girls are supposed to end up as one person, right? If they're one person split into two consciousnesses, two bodies, then Coral and Anastasia treating them like their daughters, like their twin daughters. You get to form a connection with both individually. You get to know them, and they are clearly different. For whatever reason. If that has something to do with their creation, or if they're just if it's just natural. They're clearly different. So you form a connection with both of them, and then they're going to disappear. They're going to become one again. So I think that's an interesting dynamic that I think uh, just based on the rest of the writing and the dynamics that the writing team created. That's what pushes me over the edge and makes me think that, yeah, that there could be something to this theory of them fusing, and that's why Anastasia ends up having such a hard time.
You know, I think that's really interesting. And while I'm like one of the people who's kind of like, I like them as separate people, I do think that would make for a really, really interesting narrative, especially in seeing how Amandla then portrays this one person who has these kind of separate personalities, so to speak. Um, that have been separate for so long now in one form. Like that would be really interesting. And that also makes me wonder though, given that May went through the ascension and we see her kind of being taken up into that misting thing, I wonder if that is something that she's able, like Mother Anastasia was able to do that because May went through the ascension, or if she could have done that anyway, and then if it was only because of the ascension, would Osha then have to? I guess that's what Sith Bay was saying. Like Osha would have to complete the ascension, and then they might be able to fuse in that way or something. But that's really interesting. And then I wanted to quickly point out too what's interesting about Osha is like what we see with her is kind of the reverse in a way of what Mother Anastasia explains when she's training doing the training session, where we see Osha and May grow up alongside each other, where I guess they're not necessarily at different levels, but we see May excel a lot, and she's kind of propped up as the more skilled twin. And when they're in the training session, she's quick to respond to the training while Osha kind of backs up. And Mother Anastasia is expressing that when you're by yourself, you might struggle, but when there are two of you, of course, that's the power of two, and then the power of many. But what we see is that Osha, kind of on her own, is what she gets stronger as she's on her own. I don't know. I just wanted to point that out.
So I don't think they were ever meant to merge, but I mean, obviously, it's because I think they were purposely put in two bodies. And the reason why I think it was purposeful is because if you think about it, like logically, if I have a bunch of power, it makes more sense risk wise for me to put it in two bodies instead of one. And we see like the risk of that with Anakin later down the line. Like you can kind of like go a little crazy. Or you can see the risk with OSHA where it's like one of them decides they don't want to do this. What if the one person you put all this power into decides they don't want to do it? And so in my mind, the twins thing, the two bodies is intentional because I mean, when you think about it, like twins to me represent balance, and the force is all about balance. So for like a, I don't want to call it a spell, but like magic this big, I feel like you have to be intentional with the balance. And to me, the intentionality with the balance is splitting them and keeping them separate.
And I like that too because we're only told by Soul what he assumes
Mm-hmm.
happened. He and the other Jedi only assume that it was an accident. We don't know that it was an accident. He is assuming that because he's saying, there have only been very few people in the galaxy who've been powerful enough to create life. And, they kind of ran with the idea that, oh, the consciousness split in two by accident. But yeah, we don't know that it was an accident. And that kind of points to the dynamic of the Jedi who, feel like, or in this context, might feel like they are the experts who know everything or know more. And then you get it kind of from the male perspective versus when we see Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral talking about it, there is that intentionality behind it, like you said, Freckles, where, you know, I created them, I carried them. Like that's very much, that does not sound like an accident. So that's a really great point.
Sure, yeah, I'll speak to it a little bit, and hopefully, somebody has some thoughts on it as well. But I was just kind of refreshing on it because uh, let me qualify this. I very casually studied symbology when I was younger. So I had kind of a background on this. I had some books on it. So I was reading about yin yang, and it reminded me that like Star Wars, and in the back, way back in when Lucas was originally doing the original movies, it was very much based on this sort of Chinese theology and mythology and philosophy. So the yin yang idea, um, obviously, the light and the dark, is a parallel for the yin and yang, and you have the light side and the dark side, the yin and the yang. And then, something that more and more Lucas added in was that, there's light and dark in both sides, right? So, when you see the symbol, it has the dots on the inside because that, they always acknowledge that there's a light side and a dark side, but there's darkness in the light and light inside the dark, and it's a whole like gray area sort of thing, right? Yes. Yes, a very yin yang reminiscent symbol, yes. And then we see it, somebody pointed this out, I'm not sure who it was, but somebody pointed out, when we see it on Anastaea's head, it's in the center. But when we see it on May after the ascension, it's off to the side. Uh, and I don't know how many of you guys know, about like left and right. So the Latin term for left back in the day was sinistra, because they believed that the left side was the evil side, right? Uh, so when we see it on May, it's off to that left side, right? So I don't know if there's something there that could just be arbitrary. I don't know, but yeah, it could be something. But there's also the element of we were just talking about the fact that they may merge into one. Again, to me that supports that theory, but it doesn't necessarily confirm it, because they could still end up after the ascension being just two sides of this coin. Um, but there's also something in the yin yang symbology called taiji, which is basically like it's the infinite potential. It's before light and dark, right? And so we see this uh, later on in Star Wars with the Mortis gods. They have the sister. I mean, yeah, the daughter and the son. Representing the light and the dark, and then they have the father, who represents sort of like the infinite potential, the gray, the before. He's like above them. And that's very deliberate, and it's tying into that yin yang symbology to me. And so there's an element here for sure of like, we've kind of talked about like how the girls like orbit around each other. They're never in the same spot, and they start in one place, and then they gradually, as the story goes, they kind of flip places, and it's real gradual, and it's like I said, it's like they're orbiting each other. It's like they're constantly on the other side of the yin yang, right? And so there to me there's something there where there could have been this power of two, power of many thing. They could be searching for that ultimate power, that precursor power, that greater power that combines both the light and the dark, and that could be something that uh, is tying into the ascension, and they could end up merging and becoming the combination of the light and the dark, or something like that. um, or it could be a situation uh, where they don't, uh, and it just like enhances their power, and then they represent that duality through themselves. I don't know. There's, like I said, this is one thing that I never really never really had a solid theory on was the ascension. Um, and I would really like to see where Leslie was going with that. But I definitely think there's some tie in to the yin yang philosophy here, which is really cool to me because it's tying back into, like I said, it's tying back thematically through Lucas's original inspiration. Like story wise, like cinema wise, he was inspired by like the samurai flicks and westerns and stuff like that. But like story wise and the Force, that was all Chinese, theology and symbology and stuff like that. So it's really cool to me that she was tying that in, and I think there's something there to this because the whole story is representing duality, very plainly and then very subtly and in different ways all throughout the story. Like they're tying into the idea of duality. So I'm wondering if like that's why Kymir's searching for the power too, because he's searching for you know a singular power.
I just think it's cool that as far as yin yang, they literally perfectly embody it because they're never on the same side of anything at the same time, and they like move across it in like perfectly. Like because if you think about what is it, episode 4 or 5, they're the same episode to me. I think, yeah. Uh, but like the moment that Osha is starting to like maybe subconsciously, but actually be courted by this darkness that Chimera represents, May is like, I'm gonna turn myself into the Jedi. That's like the ultimate good guy move. And it's like it's happening in the same. So, because to me, when Osha and Chimera meet, it's not like fear or anything like that. She's curious. Like she's captivated by him. Like he's clearly a bad guy. So it's not like there's no gray area there. Like he's killing people, and she's like, "This is interesting. I don't hate him."
No, in Night, she's in awe of him for sure.
Yeah,
She's
exactly.
she's fascinated.
I'm kind of into that. She can't say that yet, but she's into it.
Well, they telegraphed that it's not going to be, from that very beginning scene, they set May up to be the dark sider, the dark twin. And then at the very end of the scene, they undercut that right away. They're like, "Oh, well, she spares this dude because she sees the kid." And then that sets up him identifying Osha and sets up a whole. So it's really not good that she left him alive. And so she makes a decision there to follow her conscience instead of doing what the mission requires, really. And so they telegraph that May's going to be the not going to be the dark sider from the beginning. Sith Babe did have a couple more comments here. I definitely think they were intentionally split, but that it was so that one develops in the light and in the dark equally under the teachings of the Coven. And so, in a way, they're split intentionally, but it was so that they reach the same point in the Force at the same time. And I wonder if the Ascension wouldn't have been pushed or would have been pushed up if the Jedi had not shown up. Because that's the other thing. Uh, they were trying to rush it, but I don't think that they could have changed the time though, because it was in correspondence with the moons, which is another thing that they do to show the yin yang symbology, is they use the twin moons to do it. But yeah, it was when the moons align, so I don't think they could have changed the uh, I don't think they could have changed the time there. But I do agree with the rest of the points there.
You made a good point about how May spares the bartender, and in a way, it's almost like she's pulling the thread there because that really sets off the course of the events as well from her end. Um, both twins kind of influence events in that way. But had she killed him, like you said, there wouldn't have necessarily been any witnesses. She would have gone on to find Torben, um, and they probably wouldn't have really been able to keep up or keep track of her. They being the Jedi, um, which is interesting because in that way, I'm sure Kymir was very annoyed because May is
Yeah,
making things a lot harder on him. Like,
yeah,
what do you mean you
that
left
was
the
the
bunker
start of the
with
break.
him?
That was the start of the break between them right there, and that's
Yeah.
also uh it's for sure it's how they identified her targets. They wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
necessarily know, like Indara gets killed by somebody, okay, no witnesses to identify May or Osha as the
Mm-hmm.
killer, then we don't know who's next, and
Right.
then maybe when Torben turns up dead, maybe Soul and Kelnaka start to put it together at that point.
And we
But
don't know who did it. Yeah, yeah.
It's so funny that Soul is actually the one that puts that into motion by killing her mother in front of her. She was never going to be
Hmm.
a guy because of what she went, because of what
Right.
Soul did.
Right.
it's a path chosen for her. That's another theme throughout the show is
Yeah.
paths chosen for people, and that's a path chosen for Soul chooses a path for both of the he decides on the bridge who's the dark twin and who's the light twin. And some would say he gets it wrong, and some would say there's no right answer. But either way, he makes that decision in that moment.
And that
Hmm.
goes back to what Indara said to him, don't alter this girl's fate because of what you want. And he
You know, everybody pulling the thread one way or the other. Cause dang, everything, everything everybody does kind of leads them to each other in this really interesting way.
Leslie took so hard. Oh my God, Leslie, come back to us,
I'm
please.
saying,
Yeah, I was just
please.
gonna say this is why I love the story so much, because it's like it's so beautiful. It's a very human story of just people in a jumbled mess, making mistakes and hurting each other, and then there's the element of the force, and the element of witches creating these two girls from scratch, with magic,
Hmm.
and that, but at its base, it's a very tangled mess of humanity. So it's a really cool story.
It's
Thank you,
literally
Leslie.
a web. Yeah, yeah. Cause it, I always like I talked about that before with kind of how each character you can compare them directly to another character, whether they have some similarity or they're revolving around each other in this interesting way. And I didn't realize that, on the first one or two or three watches, but I just love that we can come back like months later and talk about stuff like this and find these really cool aspects of the story and of the character development that you can say, oh, look what both of these people did, and look at how their paths diverged, or look at, you know, Osha's decisions and May's decisions and Soul and Chimera, and look at what they both chose to do the same or what they chose to do differently, and look at where it leads them. Everybody ends up in the same place at the end of the day, but they it's just so it's that's why it's literally a web of that this path winds until they end up together at that point.
Yeah, I loved that they used so much hand to hand and so much martial arts influence because yeah, this like I said, it was definitely an influence for Lucas's work throughout. You know, the Force is essentially based on Ki and the Yin Yang philosophy, so it was really cool. And yeah, I think you're right. I'm not positive, but I do think there was some Bagua in there.
You know what I just realized now that you mentioned that too? That May and Osha fight also had a lot of capoeira in I don't know why I'm just seeing that, but a lot, yeah, like the kicking and the circular kind of dipping fluid, especially the scene where May kind of jumps back on her back and her legs go up and then they swing. Yeah, I don't, man, I can't believe I'm just I'm just noticing that. But that just made me love that even more. That they were able to incorporate that Brazilian African martial arts. I love that. Wow.
That whole fight scene
That's
is
so cool.
beautiful. The way both fights are choreographed and the way it's layered against each other. Chimera and Soul's fight and May and Osha's. It's such a beautiful episode.
My favorite
That's
thing about the
awesome.
May and Osha fight is that they're doing the same moves, but May is like super calm and Osha's just like freaking out.
Yeah. And then they're still pretty evenly matched, given all that, given everything we've talked about already about power levels and everything. They're still pretty evenly matched in that fight. And that kind of touches on the whole thing of like your emotions and keeping them in control when you fight versus, kind of what happens when you fight with a lot of emotion.
16, 16 years. Yeah. No, it definitely it definitely like you know to your point about her losing her head. Like she had been. When we first see May, she's angry, attacking Indara, and then when we first see Osha, she's like checked out basically, and then when we see them fighting there at the end, that's we know Osha's about to fall. Well, I mean, we figure at this point if, if we've been paying attention that Osha's going to be the one to fall, and we see her breaking, we see her losing control of her emotions and utilizing those in the fight, like a dark sider. So it's a cool way to kind of illustrate the fall.
Truly, really cool balance there too. Like you said, May, really emotional at the beginning. The Jedi Council reviewing her fight with Soul and pointing that out to like very kind of calm by episode 8, where she's like, no, I'm not going to kill Soul. I want him to confess. No, I'm going to throw my weapon like a Jedi does. I'm not going to fight you. This whole the Jedi don't attack the unarmed thing kind of comes up there, and how May was always reaching for the lightsaber every chance she got when she was fighting the Jedi. And then at that moment, she's just, like, no, this is not what I need. And then she's there, able to be the anchor for Osha as she's going through her um, emotional release. Yeah, man, I like this show so much. I really, who do I have to call?
You know what I think is
Let's
also
go back.
about like how like you were talking about how early on May is more emotional and all this stuff. I think it's subtly in line with the theme of like that we see in the prequel trilogy with repression leading to fall into the dark side. Because while May is like almost wild and like overly emotional, she's still emotional. Like she still processes her feelings. Even as she's Jedi, she's processing her grief. So she's moving through this thing while Osha is not. She's repressing still for all these 16 years. And then we see how that repression, much like Anakin, like them repressing his feelings, leads her to fall.
Right? And it's the Jedi in both cases.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's an excellent point.
And you know, now that you mention that too, it's like I think it's really important that she also says, you know, there's only one way to the force, and that's through training and dedication. And Chimera is the one who says, no, well, that's what the Jedi tell you, but you know, there are other ways. And he goes through the, you know, desire, um, anger, all of these emotions can lead you to the force as well. I think that's very interesting to tell someone who has been emotionally repressed and who's been keeping everything away and kind of squashing emotion down in favor of just saying, okay, if I have to reconnect to the force, I just have to train. I just have to focus. I just have to study. And we see that in short moments that doesn't really work for her. Like when she's on the prison ship, she's, you know, she tries to calm herself down and reach out for Pip. It doesn't work the way she's expecting it to work. But you know, I like that theory that um one of our, you know, acolyte people pointed out, that she gets angry and slams her hand against the cell bars, and then the ship happens to move and Pip flows right to her. Like, you know, that we don't know, like, if that's, you know, a coincidence. I won't say it's a coincidence, but you know, like that could be a direct response to her getting frustrated in that moment. And that's a really cool tie-in to later, you know, that being a subconscious thing, and then Chimera telling her, you know, there isn't just one way to the force. There are many ways to the force. It's just about what are you ready to do.
Yeah, and I 100% buy that too. That her frustration causes that in that moment. And then in episode 1, 2, Soul makes a point of saying that she hasn't trained in what it's like 9 or 10 years. I can't remember. So she definitely hasn't trained. And then by the end of the show, she's bleeding a crystal, and
Right.
that's not an easy feat. So like I mean, she's powerful, but it's how she taps into her power too. To your point,
Hmm.
it's how that power manifests.
And even she's telling Yord, you know, do you really think I could overpower a Jedi Master? Like, are you serious right now? And kill him? And of course, she literally fulfills that prophecy, but that's not even something she could anticipate for herself. And she's you in those moments you can really see how much she's been struggling with this whole, you know, leaving the Jedi due to failure, and then still being loyal to the Jedi after leaving, and you know, trying to uphold the lifestyle with her emotional processing and everything, even though she's left. You have Chimera constantly saying, why are you still acting like a Jedi? Why do you still, you know, why are you still loyal to them? Even after she kills Soul, oh, I'll tell the Jedi everything. He's like, are you kidding me right now? Like, please be serious.
Bruh, Camille was sick of them. He was like, girl, be serious. Like,
Yeah, by the end, he was done with May. I think if it weren't for Osha, he just killed her and just left her there at the
He's
Bunta tree.
probably like, oh, both
But
of y'all. Like, first May, she can't do nothing right, and then you still trying to go mess with the Jedi, girl.
Right. I'm sick of both of y'all. I know. Low key, I want to see what happens when he like snaps. I mean, I know we kind of already saw it, but I mean, like a direct snap from, yeah, like from him being like, y'all annoying me so bad. Like when May is like, I'm tired, I need water, I need to sit down, and he's like, girl, please, like you can see it on his face. I just low key, I
I
really
love
need
the
to see him.
screenshot of episode 8 where he's making the angry face.
Say it again.
I love the screenshot that somebody took of episode 8 where he's making that angry face at May.
Oh,
She won't.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Where he's like kind of pouting, but he's like, yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, I need that.
I think twins will always have a special connection. But now that you bring up Luke and Leia, that's making me think that it's solidifying my thought that I'm right about them being purposely separated. Because if you think about Luke and Leia being born after Anakin, that feels almost like a correction. Like we put too much power into this one person, we got to split it again.
You know, I think that somebody had pointed that out before. I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Dave Filoni or somebody, but I absolutely think you're on the right track with that because I've had similar thoughts. But yeah, that they're definitely meant to. They are meant to embody balance in a way that will correct what happened with Anakin. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And you know what else that makes me think of? So like I characterize the witches as like if you look at it throughout the whole thing, like colonization and everything, I think of the witches as indigenous people, right? Meaning that they already had like this knowing, this connection to the force where like they understood that you should split this power, right? They did it first. Then when you see like not saying Anakin's a colonizer, but like when you see it done again, it's done incorrectly and then it's done right later, but it's done exactly how they originally did it because they had it right first. Kind of like how we see things now that people are just discovering that indigenous people were doing thousands of years ago. Exactly. Like Soul assuming that it was a mistake or like all this stuff. Like, well, no, they actually kind of knew what they were doing. You don't understand it. Just because you don't understand it, don't mean they don't understand it. Mhm.
And what's so interesting about that is even though she was more level headed, even she had her own biases where she was like, there are plenty of cultures who have their own practices and ceremonies, but even she was like, this coven is strange. It's like, what strange to you? Clearly they're not strange to themselves. They got things working out perfectly fine on this planet, way away from everybody else until here y'all come. So yeah, it's definitely in there. It's definitely in the I don't even want to say subtext. I mean, yeah, it's very overt, very clear. Hmm. Hmm. Says a lot about. It speaks a lot too about how people carry biases, even if they might consider themselves to be informed or tolerant or allies, they still have, prejudice or internalized anything that can still create problems and cause problems. I think that's especially interesting coming from a character, a white woman character. I just think the dynamic in the story and the way that these roles were casted really works in a very interesting way. I won't get into that because that could go into a whole nother thing. But I just think, okay,
No, I was like, get into it, get into
oh,
it.
okay, we can. But I also wanted to say too, when you were asking about twins specifically, and what abilities twins might have or siblings or any other iteration of the dyad. I just was going to say that I love that this show gives us a new experience with force visions and you know premonition type things that we see with Osha. It still sticks with me that every time we saw her, she's waking up. She's always waking up from something. And we see her in these dreamscapes that are so immersive. And it's so different from what we've seen in the previous Star Wars things. Like, of course, I was thinking about Anakin and the haunting dreams and visions that he had. They were not so visibly clear, but they were kind of flashes, and the way that they were shown on screen were these kind of hazy images. And I think his fears started to kind of shape them, and as he would dream about them. And then with Luke, and really that's like the first time when we see Luke begin to communicate with um, Obi-Wan. Even he's hearing his voice when he's trying to communicate with Leia. They're kind of, we see them communicating with each other, but we don't actually see what they're seeing in their mind, if that makes sense. So I like that with Osha, we see her completely transported. The very first thing is that she sees the fire on that ship, and then she starts to hear the voices, but then we see her immediately start to, she sees young May. She runs after her. She is transported to Brindok. Then we see young Osha talking to young May. And I just love how they did that. I just, there's so many, there could be so many implications in why we're seeing it the way we are. But I just love that and what that means for, potential forced communication with twins. Because again, May didn't know that Osha was alive. So May is not necessarily having these visions. Or maybe she is, but she doesn't think her sister's alive. So I just find that really interesting.
And you
But
know
we
what's
can we can
interesting?
go
The
back to
first
the
vision.
casting later. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the first vision, it's almost framed that May is the one that's sending it to her,
Yeah,
but
I agree. Yeah.
it's but you realize that she doesn't know to send her a vision because she doesn't know she's alive yet. So either that was involuntary or that was Osha doing it.
I thought the same thing with May running and her chasing her, and then, hello sister,
Hmm.
I'm gonna kill them all. Like that. I also was like, oh, May is letting her know. She's letting her know. And then come find out she didn't even know she was alive still.
Which to me either speaks to their connection, their unique connection, or Osha's latent power that she doesn't even know has yet. Because from the way she's describing it, she feels like May is sending it to her too. I think because the way she tells Soul, she's just like May's alive, as in like she just sent me a message versus like I sent her one. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Oh yeah, we didn't forget.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I don't really know how to fully articulate it in grand depth. And that's why I said, like, this really could be a separate topic. But I feel like, I mean, obviously, like, I feel like every casting decision was very intentional. But I like the messaging that we get around the Brendok Jedi, not the Brendok Jedi, but the Jedi who go to Brendok. And how we get these interactions. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of like intersectionality stuff kind of happening here because you have a woman who is leading this team. She's clearly the superior, so to speak. At least that's what's conveyed to me. She's the superior. She is more experienced. Um, and she's trying to lead this group of males, and they're not listening to her. Someone else pointed this out too. So this is not like a original thought, but yeah, she's trying to lead this group of males, and then in that we have a really young white boy, um, Kelnaka, a fictional alien who's played by a white boy, and we have Master Soul who's played by an Asian man. So this is like just already very interesting, and I have really liked seeing other people's thoughts around, the casting around Soul, and a lot of people who in the Asian community who connected with his character and his role as kind of like the father figure and things like that. So those are things I can't speak on, but I really have enjoyed hearing those thoughts, and I think that those, I don't know if they were intentional, but I think that it's really cool that people were able to pull that out of the story. But specifically, yeah, I was talking about how you have Indara, who's played by a white woman, and she's interacting directly with an indigenous community. And in her mind, she might be saying, okay, I'm approaching this appropriately. I'm, leading this team to try not to totally interfere, but she still does a lot of things that I think many of us can see in real life is what happens when certain white women dip into stuff. And it's not saying that, you know, all of y'all are bad or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But some of y'all are very well meaning white women and y'all still create problems. So that's all I'm saying. Is like, yeah, like you can kind of see that in her role. Like she's saying, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to do X, Y, and Z. We're not going to assume that these people, this coven is doing anything malicious. Then you have Torben in the corner. These women are dangerous. Okay, what does that say? What does that say coming from him, whose master is a woman? Like, I just, all of that is just really fascinating to me. And that's why I say I feel like it's really intentional in the way it was laid out. So That's yeah.
And to that, to add on to that, it's like with the you see that intersectionality too, because Indara is not only kind of okay with them talking about this other group of women like that, but there's also a disconnect there because again, assuming that they're characterized as indigenous, but even if not, their leader is a black woman versus
Mm-hmm.
talking to Indara, there's still that disconnect there where it's like she still sees them as dangerous.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So that's why I was like, we could really go in on this topic as far as just like the casting and the the yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it when art does that, when TV, movies, books do that, you know, and that's I think it's a matter of personal preference because some people don't want that, you know, some people specifically want to turn off their brains and not think about the real world, and that's fine. That's not me, and that's one of the reasons I loved this show. You know, a lot of the shows I like, you know, it's similar stuff. It has real world implications. It says something. Uh,
It's funny because I feel like I've kind of been raised to kind of look for things like that. Like I can remember going to movies with my parents, and my mom, she would have a notebook with her so that she could write as she's watching the movie the different connections that she would come across. And my dad was always like, he would always be like, "Oh, this is hidden racism," and like so they were always very tuned to stuff like that. So I kind of, I think in my adulthood, I've, been more like, okay, what is happening here? What is, intentional or unintentional about, how these characters are moving around with each other. And I know some people, like JCW said, with Star Wars, people like to say, well, this is not the real world, so it's not da 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 da. But I mean, we know that's not true because real world influences went into the creation of and the world building of the Star Wars universe. So I think, I'm thinking specifically about Andor. Like I know this is something that I always kind of am looking at, and Andor had a lot of that, balance of a white woman interacting with an indigenous culture, being, you know, Cassian, the group he was with before his adopted mother Marva came and I mean, she kind of took him from his people. I'm not gonna lie to you, but we're she's framed as a positive force in his life, and I think that both of those things can be true. But it's a similar dynamic to what we see with the Jedi um, on Brendok and the way that they interact with Osha and the Coven. I'm only just making that connection, but yeah, like it's the same thing. So I think some part of me, subconsciously or otherwise, is always kind of gonna be looking at that, like, okay, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it happened, and I'm gonna acknowledge that it happened.
Yeah, savior complex. Definitely,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely some savior complex. And with in Acolyte, it's the empowerment of having the order behind you, that makes them do it, which is how the beautiful thing about how Leslie frames the whole thing, because feels like he's doing the right thing, and there's a case to be made that you could make the argument that he's doing the right thing, and that's the gray area of the story. He doesn't handle it right. He makes some mistakes along the way, but like he he feels like he's doing the right thing, and he may not have taken it as far, if he was, because he believes in the order. He believes that they're there to protect people, you know and so he believes that his actions will speak for themselves because he is a member of the order. He's there to protect people.
yeah. And even when Indara tells him, you know, when he's like, "Look, tell the order and let them know that these girls are special, etc." When Indar says no, the order says no, the council says no, we're done with it. He's like, well, let me talk to him. Let me, he's pressing it, and it's also like he can't take no for an answer, and also like he's not listening to his superior, who happens to be a woman, and all that. Like, there's a lot of layers in it, a lot of layers, and that's what just makes me love this show so much and keep coming back to it, because you could be peeling layers back till the cows come home, and you're gonna find something in there
We're
that you.
literally still finding new stuff, and it's been months.
Yeah,
Like, I just always think it's interesting when people think that stories should somehow be separated from life, because I don't think that's possible, because there are people writing these stories, and you're always going to write from your perspective. You're either going to write in line with it, or you're going to write opposite of it intentionally. So it's always going to be informed by what you're experiencing. So, like, this idea of like, I don't want politics in my stories, and it's like, well, we live in a political world. Like, I'm expressing myself via art, like it's going to come out in some way.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
the
If
of this is the fact that like people will write fantasy where there are no human creatures, and they'll still write in racism. And I'm like, this is the one world where you could write that out. Like, it has to exist, and yet and still, because it frames your life, you unconsciously write it in.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely, if you find yourself able to disengage with politics and feel like it doesn't affect your life, that's privilege, dude. Like, that's straight up privilege. So if you're watching a show just for, and like, power to you. Like, absolutely, if you're watching a show just to turn off your brain and not think about stuff, power to you. But that is a privilege in and of itself right there. um I did want to There's a few comments here from TK, who's listening on the stream, that I want to put forth. To the point about Indara, I definitely think her fear of the dark side allowed her to set aside her misgivings about how the rest of the coven felt, or excuse me, about how the rest of the group felt about the women in this coven. It boils down to her seeing herself as not like these women, when she really had more in common with them than she probably had with the Jedi. In Soul's defense, if he was right and something was wrong and he did nothing, would we all feel the same way? I'm not sure. Definitely all good points. I do agree that Indara, there's a case to be made that Indara could have more in common with these women than she wants to let on. And I agree. That's what I'm saying about the gray story. Like, there's a case to be made in Soul's defense. As an outsider in universe and as an outsider, watching the show, there's a case to be made that he did the right thing. you know. Yeah, it would have been the dark side, clearly. Not
Yeah.
not like suggestible, not like, oh, are they, not like, oh, the people in the universe may think they're dark side. Like, they would have been cast as the dark side, clearly. But that's not the story Leslie was telling. This is a very gray story, and I think that's a large part of what a lot of people have problems with, is they want that clear Campbellian light and dark, original trilogy kind of thing. But that's not the story Leslie was writing. And that's
Yeah.
that's why Soul's arc is so beautiful to me and so relatable to me, because, like, he, like, to your point, every character in your story should feel like they're doing the right thing. That's normal, right? Like, nobody feels like they're, but nobody goes through life and is like, yeah, I'm absolutely 100% doing the wrong thing, and I'm gonna do that shit. Like, no, that's not the way people do it. Like, so Soul's arc, like, that whole dynamic of, like we've been saying, like, feeling like he's justified, is really interesting to me. And then making all these mistakes, making all these terrible decisions,
Yeah.
causing, setting off the chain reaction, essentially, of the whole narrative.
Over and over. Yeah, a lot of people definitely, they're struggling with that, and I think it's interesting. I like that it challenges people, that this show challenges people on that idea, because even at the end of it, it's not necessarily saying that Soul deserved to die. It's saying that he did die. And even, like, I remember before we got to that episode, um when we're all in community and we were talking about what's gonna happen, like, oh, we most everybody was kind of like, oh, I hope he doesn't die. But we kind of knew, I guess, subconsciously, that that was kind of where it was headed. But we were like, oh,
Yeah, it was
it'd
not
be
looking
great.
good for my boy.
Right, like, so
I
I
want
I
him to
think.
die. I'm not gonna lie to you. I
Oh,
want him
okay, I'm
to.
sorry, I'm not gonna speak for you then. But no, like, I'll say that I saw a lot of people who were like, they didn't necessarily want him to die, but I will always remember, like, watching that episode and watching how everything unfolded. I think the first time it was kind of jarring for me, because it wasn't like, oh great, he's still alive, yay. Like, it was not necessarily a happy ending for anybody, but it really took an unconventional kind of direction that, for me at least, I had to sit with for a while. in order to really appreciate what we were seeing happen in episode 8. It's like, yeah, Soul did a bad thing. He did a lot of bad things, and he deserved to be held accountable and have consequences. He died. That's just what happens. Like sometimes, he died with the rest of them, and whether or not OSHA is gonna feel good about, whether she's gonna feel closure about it or not is something different. Whether May is gonna feel closure, I guess that doesn't matter because she don't remember nothing. But all of that, I'm just saying, it happened. He died. It happened. It wasn't no, oh, the Jedi should live and confess and have it. None of that happened. It doesn't matter. He died. So it kind of made me have to sit with that reality that, yeah, like this was meant to be a tragic outcome. Like that's just the way it goes sometimes. And a lot of people, like JC said, wanted very clear delineation where the Sith are bad. We saw them kill everybody. They're bad. The Jedi are good. They should win. The Sith should go to jail. Like for this kind of story to
Heroes
me,
versus
that's,
villains, and the heroes triumph.
yeah, it's like that's not the kind of story we were gonna get anyway. But it's like people are very much hung up on that, even though a lot of them wanted a Sith story. I don't really know how they were hoping it would go if they really, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that tells me, like, not to throw shade. I would never fan shame anybody. Like, I hate that. I hate when people, because if you like something, like if the Acolyte was the first thing you ever watched and you enjoyed it, boom, you're a Star Wars fan. You know what I'm saying? So, like, I would never fan, and all the people who are EU truthers who hate Disney Star Wars, like you still count too. You're still a Star Wars fan. I don't like the way you come at stuff, but you're still a Star Wars fan. But like this point about the Sith story to me says everything about these people following the deeper lore anyways, and not following all the content anyways, because like the Sith are dark, like the Sith storylines are dark, and particularly when you get into the novelizations of some of these storylines, it's dark. And so, like, if you're complaining that we got a story, because the whole focus was always supposed to be on an acolyte, a fall from light to the dark side. So, like, if you're complaining that our main protagonist is not a good person, I don't understand what,
It's like
like,
you're so close to getting it. You're so close.
like, yeah, that's literally the point. Like that was the whole point. Like the Sith are bad people. They have always been bad people. That's not, I don't think that's in question now, And so like yeah, some of us can identify with Osha's story. We can see how she fell, but she fell and she's evil.
Right.
So like
Right.
I mean,
She's not evil. She's just doing evil things right now.
well,
She's
yeah,
doing
yeah,
everything.
there you go.
It's like there's
And
nothing you can
yes.
do about that. So I don't. It's and again, this is I'm really not trying to like bag on anybody who was upset about it. Like I know I saw some people who were just like one person in particular I saw on Instagram who was just kind of, I think she was just shocked. She was like, she said I grew up loving the Jedi, and they were always something that I thought I should strive to be, and it was just really uncomfortable for me to see them this way. And she was receptive to, people's opinions about it. And she was very open. But I mean, like, it's like I understand that, but it's like obviously the Sith are not gonna like what the Jedi are doing. The people who have aligned themselves with the dark side are not going to just say, "Oh well, the Jedi are kind of nice, but I just like the dark side." So I like that this show gives us a reason. Like it shows them they have been betrayed by the people that they trusted who happen to be Jedi. It's not outright saying the Jedi are bad people, they're evil. It's just saying these people were hurt by Jedi. And so obviously that led them down a path.
It's like Freckles was saying that she just felt like doing evil right now.
Right,
I think
right.
it's interesting because, and going back to the point that I made earlier about people experience art like through their perspective and through their lens, like I've always interpreted the Jedi as like cops, or like, I don't want to be specific about the Christianity sect, but like super strict church people. And as a Black American who, our relationship with the cops, I've never seen them as 100% good. Like, I've always seen them as kind of like, hmm, especially starting on the, because I started with the prequels. So I always was kind of looking at them sideways, like, like I see that y'all are supposed to be the good guys, but I'm not really buying it. You know, like, I
Yeah,
have
we didn't.
like, I like, you're better. Let me, don't get me wrong, you're better than Palpatine, but like I'm also not. Mm, is there
And
any?
that's definitely how Leslie framed them in the show too, which
Yeah.
is one of the things I loved, and it's one of the things that a lot of people didn't love. But it's one of the things that it's one of the things I enjoyed, and to your point, that's how the prequels framed them too. I just think Leslie did it better, really, but to a
Right.
deeper level. Sith Babe had a comment too, about the Sith. Literally, they have to accept the darkness and reject the light. Good people don't do that, So yeah, I mean, that's that was the story. That was always the story we were going to get.
And and to Freckles' point, I mean, yeah, if you start with the prequels and you watch Qui-Gon say, "We didn't come here to free slaves." I mean, okay, you gonna feel away.
Like,
Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? You
you
didn't
just
come here
there
to.
to slaves to be the good guy.
Right.
You got a
Yeah, and
little
that and
boy sitting there looking
that's
at
the
you.
Jedi at the height
Yes.
of their power talking about, oh yeah, we're not going to free these slaves. Like what? What do
Oh,
you
you're a
mean?
slave? Okay, that's nice. Well, you know what? Let me take your blood real quick because I think you might be the chosen one. But you gonna have to leave your mom here. Sorry. Like,
Like the baby kidnapping, and I'm just like, these are the people I'm supposed to root for. I'm not seeing it. Like, I'm
yeah. Yeah, it has always been questionable. It has always been questionable. I can respect that. Yeah. And it really, again, it goes to show you that Leslie knows what the heck she's talking about. And those writers and her, they all came together really well. I know before the show even came out, people were upset. Why are there writers who aren't fans of Star Wars? Look, whatever. I think that that is important because if you're just trying to write something, you need to be a good writer. If you're a Star Wars fan but you can't write, that ain't gonna help nobody. But Leslie knew what she was talking about because even in the original trilogy, you have this moment where Luke has to defy what Obi-Wan's Force Ghost and what Yoda are telling him. Like, if you go right now, you gotta kill Vader. You know that, right? You gotta kill your daddy. Well, he didn't know he was his dad yet, but they were like, you gotta go get this done.
You're going to have
And
to fight the scariest dude in the entire
in the
galaxy.
entire galaxy. And you are not prepared and you are not ready. And Luke is like, but my friends are in danger. Like they could die. I have to go help them. And Obi-Wan and Yoda are just like, forget your friends. Like right there, we're already presented with this concept that these experienced aged Jedi who are supposed to know what's best for everyone are fallible. They're not necessarily looking at what Luke really needs and what his concern is. And whether you want to say he learns it the hard way because he loses his arm or not, he was not trying to let his friends die. And he did not kill his father, which of course we know leads to balance being restored. So it's just like, they've never been they've never been set up as perfect. They've always been set up as, you know, the most experienced, but they've never known the right decision for everything. Like they've never always had the answer. And that's directly connected to what we see happening in the Acolyte. So yeah, like she knew what she was doing. It's right there.
Absolutely. No, I hate when people say Leslie's not a fan because she tied thematically so well into everything. And one thing I think that is missed, since we're talking about this, one thing I think that is missed about Obi-Wan's arc that I think is so beautiful and well done in the prequel setting is that, throughout the prequels, we see him giving Anakin the advice to be mindful of his feelings. But when we see when he's talking to Luke throughout the original trilogy, he's saying search your feelings. He's telling him to be in touch with it. So Obi-Wan has realized the flaw of the Jedi, that it is illustrated throughout the prequels and again here in the Acolyte, that the Jedi are repressive of these emotions, and that if you do not address them, if you do not learn to live with them, that they will be your downfall. So I think that's something that's missed a lot. That's a really important point, a beautiful point about Obi-Wan's arc that they managed to do across 25 years in a prequel setting. And I think since we're talking about it, it's important to note here because it's Anakin and Osha's falls, like Say has pointed out in her real super excellent thread. They parallel each other a lot.
You know what, too? I think that that's even a good point around Obi-Wan, um, given kind of the little bit we got in the Kenobi show, which is, you know, similarly, he cut himself off from the Force for, a long time. And we're kind of seeing him go through his lowest point of, having survived, all the Jedi being wiped out and having to be in hiding and then, you know, dealing with this failure and your role in ultimately leading to the greatest threat of the galaxy coming into power, all of that. So it's kind of interesting to look at his journey, like you said, JC, and kind of look at the way that he processed his emotion, or rather shut away his emotion about it, and then look at what happened with Osha kind of in a similar way.
Yes, I coming in at the last minute, I actually had a question, and especially because I wanted to know everybody's perspective on this. In episode 4 or 5, I don't even remember which episode it was specifically, but it was the moment that Sol and Kaimir had their first face off, right? And Sol's asked him, "Who are you?" And Kaimir has the specific line of, "You don't remember me." I read it as him suggesting that he knew Soul before this whole mess went down. But other people's been telling me that they just read it as Soul not remembering the apothecary of 3 days ago. Like, How do you guys actually saw this line being delivered? Like, did he know Kymir long ago when he was still Vernestra's Padawan? Or
One,
is there
They
something
definitely,
going on here?
how they're connected is up for debate, but they definitely knew each other, and it makes sense because it's apparent that he used to be Vernestra's Padawan, so they could have just known each other that way, or there could be a deeper connection there too.
Yeah.
100% they knew each other. And the reason why I think so is because, and I think I said it on Twitter a while ago, but if he didn't remember him from the apothecary shop, then that just means his disguise worked. Like, why would he bring that up? He was trying to fool them back then. So, of course, like, if he didn't know him, it was like, oh, yeah, cool. I can use that disguise again. It works. It wouldn't be.
Yeah, and I think there's the mind wipe is a really interesting narrative element because I think that clearly must have come into play if Soul and Kymir knew each other and Soul doesn't remember him. There's something there. There's more to that story too. And I know everybody thought that Jung Jae and Turner Smith wouldn't come back and Carrie Ann Moss wouldn't come back, but I think there's more flashback sequences. I think there's more story to be told there for sure. I think they were coming back. And I think there's more story. I think there's more story not only between Vernestra and Kymir, but between Soul and Kymir.
Yeah. Yeah, I really need flashbacks. I have gone back and forth on the subtext of that line specifically, because I personally think it would be funny if he was just kind of like, "Oh, you don't remember me," because he's Kymir, he's like goofy. But I also think that I mean, we know he was old. We know that he was Vernestra's Padawan, and we know that Vernestra has known Soul since he was a child. So I think that much is clear. They probably were peers. And that reminds me that I never posted my memory wipe thread, and I need to do that. But yeah, I'm with
Yes,
y'all
please
as
do.
far as them knowing each other. I just think it would be funny if in that particular scene he was just like, "Oh, you don't remember me from the apothecary? I'm so hurt." But that's just me.
I think it'd be even funnier if he was like, you don't remember me from that one time we bumped into each other at the mess line, like we were at the temple. I
That's
was in my Padawan robe. I had this real
But
bad haircut
so
back then. You don't remember me?
But I mean, that is.
he
yeah.
sounds shocked that he
How
didn't.
many people did Vernestra wipe the memory of them?
Listen,
Guys.
remind me, remind me to post that thread, y'all.
That is a good question,
Remind me to
and I
post
think
that thread.
we need the answer to that in a season 2, Star
Season
Wars.
2.
And 3 and 4.
And 4 and 5 and 6. And a
Yeah.
movie.
Speak.
And a
Yeah, I mean,
trilogy.
like we were talking about earlier, she's old, so she's done been around. She's at this point got to be 116 or so, 120 or so.
I heard
So
people say they said she was 118 at
yeah,
this
something
in
like
the
that.
show
Yeah,
right now. Yeah.
yeah.
And what's crazy is Yoda's older and he been around. So he knows everything.
Oh
Unless
yeah.
he
Well,
doesn't. See there? Unless. Mm-hmm.
Tum tum tum.
Yeah.
maybe that's what the last scene was. Maybe she was wiping Yoda's brain.
Mm.
She was gonna go get some advice about how to lie harder.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
that too.
really.
That's that. Yes,
Gatekeep, green, girl boss, whatever.
just a pair of green lion bitches.
Telling each other exactly.
Good job, girl.
Yes, we did. Yeah, well, thank you to everybody for listening there too.